But now, without further ado, may I ask Commissioner Vella for his keynote speech.
Thank you very much, Franz, colleagues from the panel, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening once again, and it is a great pleasure for me again to welcome you to this panel discussion, this time on the social dimension of fisheries, on the safety and on the working conditions of our fishers at sea. An hour ago, or less than an hour ago, we were discussing how to ensure a sustainable seafood supply in the years and in the decades to come. And sustainable seafood does not just mean working for healthy fish stocks. It also means harvesting fish and seafood under decent working and under decent living conditions. I remember as a very young boy watching fishermen chatting to each other whilst mending their nets in my little home village in Malta. And back then, little did I understand that fishing is a hard, fishing is a back-breaking work. Not only that, but it is also one of the world's most, I would say, dangerous jobs, because accidents can, and unfortunately accidents do, happen very, very easily. We all have a collective responsibility as states, as European and international institutions, and also as ship owners. A responsibility to do our utmost in ensuring decent working conditions and ensuring that the vessels are safe, that the vessels are secure for anybody working on them wherever that may be. And this is a responsibility also, it is our responsibility also to make certain that fishers are well trained, that fishers are certified, and fishers are also fit for the job. For all of this, the international community has managed to agree on some joint standards. But these standards have not been sufficiently ratified. As a result, they are far from being implemented on the vessels themselves. And the numbers are ringing. Cases of fishing vessels involved in labor exploitation and even slavery and human trafficking have been all over the news. Because criminals still believe that at sea, far from the watchful eye of the law, they can act with a level of impunity. The European Union is taking this issue very, very seriously, and we have taken steps to tackle these problems. And we have seen improvements, for example, through our labor dialogue with Thailand. But more needs to be done to prevent and to eradicate illegal and criminal behavior. As Commissioner President Juncker has repeatedly said, we are a Europe that protects. So we are pushing countries to ratify the conventions and to implement them. The higher the number of states to do so, the better basis we will have to enforce the rules and to protect the workers. This is true not just at a European level, but more so at a global level. But I know that even many European Union member states have not yet done their homework. This is, for me, unacceptable, and it is in sharp contrast to what we see in shipping, making the situation all the more frustrating. Just imagine two brothers going out at sea. One of them works on a container ship. The second brother works on a fishing boat. They are both out at sea for weeks at a time, but their levels of protection are radically different. What signal are we sending here? That one of those two lives is worth more than the other? Or is it more worthy of protection? Is the message that we are sending out there that we care less about the health of our fishers than about the health of the fish that they catch? Colleagues, by not ratifying these conventions, we are failing our fishermen. And that is why I have invited you here today, basically to highlight these very important issues, but also to send a message to all states, be they coastal, port states, or even flag states, to take the necessary steps to ratify the conventions and, more importantly, to implement them. And our message to the wrongdoers and criminals is equally clear. We cannot tolerate labor exploitation, and we will pursue criminal acts and punish them wherever they occur. What better stage than the world's biggest seafood fair to convey this message? Let me at this stage thank in particular the representatives of Europesh and ETF who have tirelessly pushed member states and the Commission to achieve real results in improving the situation. And I would also like to thank the other panelists for taking the time to join this very important discussion today. And I'm looking forward to hearing your views. So thank you very much for coming and for contributing to this very important discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Vella. And now I think we should start with the panel. As I said before, I will ask a question to one panelist, and then maybe ask a second panelist to react on that or his or her opinion on that question, and then we turn to the next question. So not each panelist has to intervene or is expected to intervene on each single question, but of course you will, all of you, get enough airtime to raise your message and to transmit your words. I would start because I think the real purpose here also for this event is that we as an institution want to listen to the stakeholders and want together to promote, as the Commissioner said, ratification and especially implementation of these conventions and standards. So my first question, I think, let's start with Fleming, would be what are really the most burning issues for workers on board fishing vessels at the moment?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. First of all, I would like to make a small remark. There's absolutely nothing political in meant being on my left side, but there was no mic on this chair, so naturally he took that chair. Well, on the ground, if you're talking with the fishermen on the boat, there it was, then of course there would be a lot of topics of their daily lives, but they would vary quite a lot from region to region. If you go to the northern part of Europe, they are all very concerned what will happen about Brexit, the access to European to British fishing waters. Go to the Mediterranean, there's a dispute between north and south, the access to tuna, the quota to tuna, and the lack of fish stocks, especially in the Mediterranean, so that would be quite varied. But another issue, if you talk to them and take the time, is this notion of being second-rate citizens. And you said it, Commissioner, you can implement the Maritime Labour Convention in a couple of years in all European countries. No fuss, it's very complicated, but it was done. Convention 188, the Torremolinos Convention, the STCW Convention, the Cape Town Agreement, all international instruments are not implemented in Europe. Some of Convention 188 has now been implemented thanks to the work of the social partners and their agreement, but simply my members out there, when talking to themselves, they're saying, why is there one level for shore-based workers, one level for seagoing mariners, and an entirely different level for us? And that is really their concern. Mr. Vella said it brilliantly, and then that is something they really feel in their daily lives. So therefore the social dimension should be streamlined, and I know that Commissioner Juncker, the President of the Commission, has said that clearly, that the social part of the legislation should be an integral part of all the European Union policies.
meant. Would you share that analysis? But first, maybe for the audience, maybe you could enumerate a few of these standards we're talking about. I mean, Fleming mentioned conventions. Maybe not everybody is exactly familiar with these conventions, but maybe not in extenso, but a few examples of these standards, maybe.
Well, let's start with the oldest one, and that is the Torremolinos Convention, followed up by the Torremolinos Protocol in 1993, and then in 2012 we had the Cape Town Agreement, all to invite member states of the IMO to ratify, make the ratification process simpler, but unfortunately, the convention is still not in force, although the European Union has implemented it in a directive. But member states of the European Union should ratify, regardless of having this directive, because it helps bringing this convention into force. That's one. Then the second one is the one on education and training of fishermen, STCWF. In short, it is in force, but not enough countries have ratified it to make good use of it. Member states of the European Union, they are very reluctant to ratify, but they should do it, because it is also an instrument to ensure free movement of labor. And now the free movement of labor is hampered because we do not have a harmonized system in the European Union. And then the final one is the Work in Fishing Convention from the ILO. Social partners have made an agreement, and we have made use of the possibilities that the treatments of Lisbon give to social partners to legislate. This social partners agreement led to a directive by which C188, the Work in Fishing Convention, is now implemented in European legislation, but only for workers. And everybody knows that in Europe many fishermen are self-employed. And therefore it is still very, very necessary that the member states ratify C188 to cover all their fisheries. I think that is an answer to your question.
And would you share the analysis of Fleming?
Yes, I share the analysis. The thing is that even if we have legislation in Europe, we still need to ratify these conventions in order to bring them into force. One other thing is very important. If you look at the history of all those conventions, European member states are less reluctant to ratify than Asian countries. Many of the international agreements on labor in fishing have never been ratified by Asian countries. And when we agreed to the ILO convention, Work on Fishing Convention, we did a lot to ensure that the requirements from that convention met the requirements from Asian countries. But still, no ratification from any Asian country. And that is a problem. So we hope that all the efforts that have been put into the relationship with Thailand will end into a ratification from a major fishing nation in Asia, being Thailand.
That's a very, very good point, and thank you for that, Ment. Alet, from your experience and practical daily work, why is it that states, that ILO members, and also the same goes for IMO members, are so reluctant to ratify and implement conventions and standards when it comes to fisheries? We have heard that there's a big difference because in the standards concerning seafarers on commercial vessels, these international conventions are in place, they are ratified, transposed into EU law as well, but it's another subject. So why is it that in fisheries states are so reluctant?
Thank you so much for asking me that question. Before I respond to that question, may I just say one thing? I saw the previous panel and the one before, and now this also. And although the ILO is very, very happy and honored to be here on this panel. I wonder, why am I the only woman here? What is going on? Women form part of society. We should also include them in panels, but more importantly, we should really take them seriously and give them a voice at work. 90% of women, the workforce in the seafood industry comprises 90% women. And yet, where are the women? I see a lot of women here in the audience, and I'm very happy with that. So just on that. Thank you. With the question about why are member states of the ILO not ratifying Convention 188? Let me first say you already referred to the Maritime Labour Convention, which has lots of links with the fisheries sector. The efforts made to ratify that convention are much larger than what is happening with fishing. I don't understand. We, quite frankly, are puzzled. There are 86 member states of the ILO that in less than 10 years have ratified this very, very complicated other convention, the MLC, much more complicated than the Work in Fishing conventions. And the Work in Fishing convention only has 10 ratifications. Meant I agree with what you said, that European countries perhaps do ratify a bit more than Asian countries. But does anyone know by heart how many EU member states have ratified Convention 188? Yes, that's the right number. 3 only. And this is despite the directive. The directive has entered into force on the same date as Convention 188 entered into force. And this was on 16 November 2017. So member states are already obliged to implement and to change their legislation to implement the convention. So may I make a big plea to all of you to go back to your governments and ask them to ratify this convention. This is not just in the interest of protecting workers, fishermen, women and men. This is also in the interest of the industry. If we ensure that most countries ratify this convention, we create a level playing field. Everyone plays by the same rules, and this stops the race to the bottom. So, to respond to your question, we don't know why they don't ratify. We try to do everything possible to help, because there are, of course, quite some legal issues to overcome. The ILO has just started a rigorous ratification campaign. If there's any countries that would like to have some support in or advice that could help them to ratify and implement the convention, we are most happy to assist. Thank you.
Thank you, Arlette, for that. Ment, you want to respond to that?
Yes, because I think there are some reasons. And one of the reasons is that fishing is usually seen as something local. And why would you introduce international standards for an activity that is local? But that's wrong, because fish is international, always. Because fish ends up on world markets. Fish from Asia comes to Europe. Fish from Europe goes to the United States and to Brazil and to Africa. So there is an international link, and therefore it is necessary to stop thinking locally. We have to think internationally. The second is that in government, in the administration of states, fishing is always diverted between 3 or 4 or even 5 departments of government, of administration. And these governments, these administrations, these departments do not talk with each other, and that means that it is very difficult to introduce legislation that covers fishing. And of course there is another force, and that is reluctance from the sector itself. There are, within the sector, there are parties that are very reluctant to adhere to international standards. And within Europesh, we see members, we see other stakeholders that start using the momentum of the discussions that we have, like here, to say, no, we should stop this. We should use these international standards, and we have to introduce them. And if our governments don't do it, we will do it ourselves. And there are some beautiful examples of this, and I think, Julio, you can add to what I just say. Governments, yes, they stay behind. They have to do their work. They have to legislate. They have to enforce. But we can do a lot ourselves as well. And the social partners in Europe have shown that we can do it on our own. We can sit together. We can make an agreement on how to implement international standards. So these are, I think, a few of the reasons why governments lag behind.
Thank you very much for that. I was going to ask also, in any case, Dr. Barange for his experience, because as he said already in the previous panel as well, the FAO is doing a very, very important groundwork with countries, with member states all over the globe. And in this respect, what is your experience? Could you maybe also tell us a little bit about that, and then maybe connect with Alet, what Alet has said?
Thank you very much. If I may, I'll follow up from this last question, which is, to me, sometimes comparing seafarers and sea merchants with fishermen are not really a very good match, because they have in common that they operate at sea, but they are such different activities. And seafarers and sea merchants have a level of education and training that is much higher than fishermen, and much more consistent, much more formal than fishermen. 90% of fishers are actually small-scale operators, 90%. So the fragmentation in the field is huge. It is very difficult to establish this commonality that you see so much easier in the seafaring and sea merchant industries. Why countries don't ratify 118? To me, there's two additional issues that haven't been mentioned. One is the fear of the costs involved, particularly in terms of monitoring and enforcement. What does that mean for them? And the second is the issue of policy domestication. Some countries prefer to first operate the policy at national level and then sign the international legislation, rather than the other way around. Depends on the nature of the country. It's a difficult issue. What FAO is thinking is that we are now, as I mentioned in the previous panel, implementing the Port States Measures Agreement, and there is a possibility of aligning and getting synergies in terms of monitoring and enforcement by linking the monitoring and enforcement of different directives. So that is an area that we're trying to work on, and we're thinking about it. The FAO also has a committee on fisheries, which many of you know, every 2 years, and has also two subcommittees, and one subcommittee on trade. And in the last meeting of the subcommittee on trade, just a few months back, there was a request from member countries to FAO to develop guidelines of social responsibility. And so we will be doing that in the next few months and a couple of years to bring that more to the table. There's one issue that to me is very important, to FAO is very important. So we've been talking about 118. This operates about operations at sea on the boats, but fisheries has a long value chain, and we need to make sure that when we deal with issues of social responsibility, we address them all along the value chain and not just what happens at sea.
Thank you very much. I think it's a very interesting information also that the subcommittee of COFI is working on these guidelines. In any case, we have heard from you, Ment, now also that the sector is quite interested, or parts of the sector, fishery sector, not only in Europe but in other parts of the world as well. So maybe turning to you, Julio, who has experience on that, and also your organization, what is the sector doing to first maybe promote with their states also that the ratification implementation of these standards, or are there any other initiatives that you could share with us in this respect?
Yes, well, first, our organization is a group of tuna purseaners operating in the 3 major oceans of the world. We have 47 vessels employing 2,500 people. And we have realized for a very long time, and the first action was the social clause of the SFPAs back in 2005, when we have a commitment in having ILO minimum salaries on board the vessels that we benefit from the SFPAs. That was the first thing. And after that, we simply understand what has been said here before. It's a level playing field. We are complying, we are committed to our crew, and this is why we are so performant, because our major asset is our people, our fishermen. These are why we are so good fishermen, because we consider people, people is engaged with the company, and people is happy to be on board and well treated, well paid. As that was a philosophy for ship owners for a long time, we have decided to generate the first standard in the world, including the ILO Convention 188. We know that all the governments have been dragging their feet since 2007 to ratify this ILO Convention. And we know that we are complying with all is in that convention. And we have decided, well, let's generate that benefit, that value in a standard. Spain has generated a standard that goes together with other elements that goes on the IMO requirements. It goes with the insurance, because the problem with the insurance many times is related to poor conditions on vessels, so we need to have the best assurance possible, and the classification of the vessels, and the best monitor, control, surveillance that Spain is having with the ISO 9001. So that is open to all the flags of the world, because we have vessels not only in Spain, we have vessels in Seychelles, flags in Seychelles, Guatemala, Panama, Ecuador, and all are complying with that. In our ocean conference in Malta, we made a commitment in saying before the end of 2017, all our vessels will be certified by this standard that we mentioned. We comply with that. We have all the 47 now. We also have another commitment with WWF in generating this fisheries improvement project that goes in hand with the sustainability, environmental sustainability of the fishery. And by 2021, we hope to have the MSC certification. And this is an engagement that we can demonstrate that engagement with the NGOs, with the civil society to improve fisheries is possible. So those two elements have now the major challenge that we propose in the conference on Malta, saying how can we get the certification of the full sustainability chain, is saying the social and the environmental sustainability of the fishery. And this is now the challenge that we are looking forward for the different people that are working in certification and that, but always following laws, because this is what we are doing, taking the international law, applying on board our vessels, taking the Spanish law, EU regulations, applying that, and going a bit beyond that.
That sounds very encouraging indeed, and an interesting initiative, of which we would like to see more. Ment is quite trigger happy. If I may. Yes, of course.
Yes, well, you have the example of Spain. In the Netherlands, I think 90% of C188, the Work and Fishing Convention, we have implemented through a collective bargaining agreement. Not only for the European fishers, but also for the fishers that we have to take on board under fisheries partnership agreements. We do what we can. But instead of certification by private organizations, we have a preference for implementing the international standards in the law and having the enforcement also done by the flag state. That is one of their international duties to do this, and we hope by taking this opinion, we do not make member states, flag states, lazy. Because if we do all the work, and the governments and the administration do not do their work, the system will never be efficient. So I think it should be a very strong message to governments. Do your work. If you have vessels under your flag, it is your duty, really, an international duty, to legislate and implement these international standards.
Thank you, Ment. I think we can all agree to what you started saying now, is that first of all, of course, it's nice to have initiatives, private initiatives. They are very good too, because the world is not a perfect world, but member states of international organizations need to implement what they agreed on and need to bring about the law and enforce it. Hugh, what is your take on that, and maybe also about some initiatives from your organization in this context? I've seen you wanted to come in still on that, but I think we will be coming back to it. Okay?
So certainly we've heard that there's been some challenges with implementation and ratification. One of them has been, understanding the scale of the fishing industry, understanding where the vessels have been going, and actually being able to monitor and track them. The Cape Town Agreement has an opportunity to change that, and as an organisation we are looking to help the ratification and the implementation through as many countries as possible, because 9 countries as it stands today is not sufficient to bring it into force. There's also been the problem that, as you said, seafarers have seen a lot of implementation. We've got a highly commercial industry which is economic, whereas the fishermen, there's often small vessels who operate, and so on a scale of implementation, there hasn't been a market pull. A lot of seafood buyers have not been able to see who is actually operating and providing fish into their seafood supply chains. However, technology has allowed the intent to be delivered. We're seeing the cost of adoption coming down, and so it's then providing opportunities for buyers to go to governments to say, actually, you need to ratify these things and you need to implement them because we care about the people on board the fishing boats. And so, from a Pew point of view, we see that IUU, the social and the labour aspects are intertwined, and that we've got Port State Measures Agreement where the boats interact at a port level. We've got the Cape Town Agreement and ILO 188, and actually as a sweet spot, bringing the 3 together and being able to implement them is what we need to try and achieve. Just to take the point on third-party certification, a lot of third-party certification is being embraced by seafood supply chains because there's a recognition that they have to make sure that they can demonstrate that what they want is happening on board the boats, where governments are not able to demonstrate that for them. So in some regards, supply chains and supply chain owners are adopting third-party certification as a proxy for the fact that governments are not ratifying and implementing the treaties and international agreements that actually are in place that should be enforced.
Thank you very much. I have one reaction already from the person sitting next to the Commissioner. Maybe you can introduce yourself. If you yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. So I heard mention Thailand, and my name is Adison Promtep, Director General of Department of Fisheries from Thailand. And I would like to update of our working on the C188. And thank you for help from the European Commission and ILO. We are seriously working to be able to ratify the C188 as soon as possible. Right now, we draft the new law to be able to comply with that. So it's in the process. And we hope that we can be able to ratify by the end of this year, or maybe a little bit early next year. It's just on the process, but our government is very committed for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think this is also a very positive message that we have heard now. Now, Alet, you wanted to react to...
Yes, I wanted to come back to the private compliance schemes, the industry, as meant, and also others have said, to take up obligations and to take charge of the sector. Just to say that sometimes we hear in ILO that ILO is against these private compliance schemes. Well, let me just clarify that the ILO is not against private compliance schemes. They are excellent. Corporate social responsibility, responsible business conduct, other agreements to make sure that the industry fulfills its obligations, of course, are wholeheartedly welcomed. However, it is, as you already said, Mr. Moderator, it's very important to ensure that it's the states that accept their duty to enforce their legislation, and they have to ensure that all workers, whether they be fishers, migrant fishers, other workers, that they have access to their rights. The fundamental principles and rights of work are fundamentally binding to every member state of the ILO, which is virtually every country in the world. So it's important to say that. Nonetheless, these private compliance schemes can really help not only direct governments in the right direction, but also can help support these public schemes. But it should be clear, also because there's a risk of proliferation of standards and different codes and agreements, and everyone just changes the rules a little bit and so on. So it's clear that global standards are the highest goal. And these global standards, again, I would like to reiterate, they also ensure this level playing field, and that's very important. I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Much for clarifying this, Alet. I think we are absolutely with you. We should not let off the hook the governments, that's for sure. I had Fleming and then maybe Manuel, yeah?
Just briefly, because the agreement that we made with the employers in the European Social Dialogue, as Ben said, it applies only to employed fishermen. And not only that limitation, it does not apply, because that lies without the remit in the treaty for certain aspects of social welfare. It does not apply to port state controls. So therefore it is in the interest not only of the industry, and we go hand in hand here to the governments saying, please do ratify, but it's also in their national interest to secure this level playing field, because you have the no more favorable treatment clause in the convention. So when fishing vessels are calling on your ports, even just for bunkering purposes, then you can demand that, or you shall demand that they live up to the convention if you are party to that convention. So therefore it's the interest of all. And you said that the ILO are giving a hand to Thailand with the implementation. I think maybe you should consider giving a hand to the governments in Europe, because we had a project with the social partners some years ago where we went around to a number of countries and spoke with the administration and say, why do you not ratify? And they all said, well, we have not a problem, but in the transportation ministry they have a problem, or in the Ministry of Social Affairs they have a problem, or in the Ministry of Agriculture they have a problem, or in the Ministry of Fisheries they had a problem. There was no horizontal coordination within each member state. So actually, my guess would be, and that is at least the case of Denmark where I come from, we are fully capable, all laws and legislation are in place, but for political reasons, because the present government don't want to impose any further administrative burdens on the employers, they are not going to ratify. They have not even checked with the employers whether there is such burdens or not. So maybe the Commission could give us a helping hand, and the ILO maybe do the same. I know that it's customary that you have given aid to some of the less developed countries in their implementation, but it seems that here is a case for helping Europe in their implementation process.
Thank you, Fleming. Very, very good points, and I see a lot of nodding around here, also by our commissioner, so I think the message is taken. Manuel?
So I just wanted to add to that, and I think that we all seem to be in agreement that countries have a responsibility and they can't bypass that responsibility. We cannot help them bypassing that responsibility by fixing the problem through another mechanism. But having said that, you know, there's no doubt that certification and market-based measures would actually help as well in implementing social policies. But in so doing, I just want to make sure that we understand that it can't be done in a way that discriminates unfairly and destabilizes the markets. So in particular, FAO 2 years ago now started implementing the small-scale fisheries guidelines in the context of poverty alleviation and food security. And this is a very complex process, and there's a very significant social agenda on the small-scale fisheries. And you would have all heard about the Sustainable Development Goals, Sustainable Development Goal 14 on oceans. There's one particular indicator which FAO has responsibility over, which is 14.B, which is an indicator to ensure that small-scale fisheries have access to resources and markets. And so we make sure that when we implement all these global guidelines and instruments, that we ensure that we don't reduce the access to markets from countries and producers that are already at the bottom of the pile and that find it more difficult to implement difficult legislation.
Thank you for that insight. Now we're a little bit running out of time. We started a bit late, I know, but our commissioner has also another meeting in a very short time. So I can take one more question to one of the panelists that I wanted to ask still. And then I can take two questions from the audience, and then I have to give the commissioner the floor. Otherwise, we will not hear his concluding remarks. Okay. So my question would be to Hugh. We are at the biggest seafood fair in the world here. So is there a role for the consumer in all this?
The consumer has a role to play, although I think it's a relatively small one. The role is to ask the people who provide them their seafood, do you know where my seafood's coming from? Do you know the vessels that are supplying? Do you know, are they authorized to do what they do? And do you know that they are actually complying and doing what they say they should be doing? If consumers ask their seafood buyers should then incorporate within their policies something that says we'd like to preferentially buy from states that have ratified and properly implemented Cape Town Agreement, ILO 188, Port State Measures Agreement, and also then, where that's not the case, that you should advocate for it and you should be encouraging states to properly implement it. And so the consumers have a part to play, but actually the seafood buyers and the people here talking about a global seafood business have an even more a much bigger part to play in that.
Thank you for that. Now it's a possibility for the audience to ask a question. Who wants to ask a question? Yeah. No volunteers? Maybe somebody from the panel still wants to add something to what we have discussed so far? Yeah.
The question, in fact, is what the market can do about all that, and how important is to be responsible in your purchasing of seafood. And the laws are there. The implementation is pending from governments, and we need that to happen. And in the meantime, there are things that can work. And whereas everybody is very concerned about the sustainability in the environmental aspect, they say it's a great concern, and everybody is looking for certification because governments are not ready to deliver on that. On the social aspects, we have been all quite hypocritical, I would say, because it's a question of price at the end of the day. So, and the people, many of the industries, processing industries, major markets, retailers, what they want is cheap fish, no matter how it's produced. This happens in all the other sectors, in clothing, in whatever, electronics. So it's kind of a problem on the big markets where you have a value because everybody wants to sell in your market, but your requirements to come into the market are very low. So what we would like to have is that as well as we are complying with the laws, cross-cutting for all the imports that are coming to at least to the EU market that is the more attractive in the world. And this is the one request that we have to the Commissioner to try, as we have heard this week in the Parliament, having the same conditions to all the imports, at least to be required with the same requirements that we have as EU producers. And that could be a great achievement and a good, very good movement to improve sustainability in a whole sense, not about environmental, but also, and more important, because I believe personally that fishers are more important than fish.
Ned?
There's one that I could add to it. Without fishers, there is no fishing. I think the industry has to take responsibility itself as well. That is very important. We have to all recognize that we have to treat fishermen, we're talking about fishermen here, in a decent manner. Like people ashore are also mostly treated in a decent manner. And why should fishers not be treated like that? So it comes down, at the end of the day, that the sector itself takes responsibility for the people that work in the sector. And I think that there are companies in the European Union that have recognized this. I am proud to work for a company that has recognized this. Julio works for a company that has recognized it and take responsibility. But there was a research done by the European Commission asking the public how important they thought it was that their fish was produced in a civil manner, in a socially accepted manner. Only 15% of the consumers were interested in it. So people buy their food through their wallet. If their wallet is empty, they go for cheap. And therefore it is necessary that companies take their own responsibility. And I think that is a message that we have to convey. Plus, all the flag states have to take their duties as well.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the audience, first of all, and also to all the panelists. I think we have heard very important and very interesting positions and pleas and messages also that we will certainly try and transmit as much as we can and wherever we can. Before just asking the Commissioner for his closing remarks, I would announce that for journalists who desire interviews or going on to discuss one or the other aspect, I think all the panelists have signaled to us that they are available still. So if you want to have questions asked to panelists, you can continue afterwards. But now I would like to thank everybody and ask Commissioner Vella for his closing remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think this has been a very interesting discussion. You've had some very excellent contributions and also some insights, knowing that you are all experts in your specific fields. And I am reassured to hear that at least we are all united in our strong will to address these problems, not to let any fishermen feel that they are, as you said, second-rate citizens. And as they say, where there is a will, there is a way. So I am confident that working together, and we do have to work together in the coming months and in the coming years, we will take decisive steps to ratify and to improve and to implement the rules that we have. To improve in order to improve the lives and work of millions of onboard workers, to help reduce the risks as well of accidents and to prevent labor exploitation. As I said at the very beginning, the European Union should be a union that protects. And I think it is our duty to play a strong and a very proactive role, to lead by example. And I take note, and this is exactly what we all have been saying, we have to lead by example and we have to swiftly improve the situation even domestically. That is why we are assessing how to transpose any outstanding international rules into the European Union's legal order. It is why we have included the social dimension of fisheries also in our 2016 communication on the international ocean governance, which we launched, myself and Federica Mogherini. And I can already announce that next month the European Commission will issue a report on the ratification of the Convention on Standards in Training, Certification and Watchkeeping in Fisheries. I think we should want to pride ourselves that our industry is the most sustainable when it comes to fish stocks, but I think we should also be in a situation to pride ourselves that our industry is also the one with the highest and the safest social standards. So yes, we are keeping up the pressure not only outside the European Union, but also inside the European Union, just to make certain that those member states, and as I said and as you confirmed, there are a good number of member states who have not yet ratified these rules. So I look forward to continuing our work together, and once again, thank you very, very much. Thank you. Thank you.